The 41st Ordinary Summit of Heads of State and Government of the Southern African Development Community, SADC, will take place this week in Lilongwe, Malawi. The Southern African Development Community is an intergovernmental organization whose purpose is to promote regional socio-economic integration as well as political and security cooperation among 16 Southern African countries. A very good evening and a warm welcome to Talk of the Nation. My name is Denver Kisting, along Auni Ashikuti, our sign language interpreter this evening. Now, SADC member states convene this week under the theme Bolstering Productive Capacities in the Face of COVID-19 Pandemic for Inclusive, Sustainable Economic and Industrial Transformation. Tonight, we look at regional integration, economic development and other SADC-related topics. Joining me in studio to dissect this very important topic are Ambassador Kaira Mbwende, former Executive Secretary of SADC. Good evening, sir, and welcome to Talk of the Nation.
Good evening and thank you.
We're also joined this evening by Dr. Jacob Nyambe, Executive Dean in the Faculty of Commerce, Management and Law at the University of Namibia. Good evening, sir, and welcome to Talk of the Nation.
Good evening. Thank you.
Also joining us this evening is Madam Kashiwana Neshila Emmanuel, a political commentator. Good evening, ma'am, and welcome to Talk of the Nation.
Thank you for having me and good evening.
Joining us via telephone this evening is Mr. Munetsi Madakufamba, Executive Director at the Southern African Research and Documentation Center. Good evening, sir, and welcome to Talk of the Nation.
Good evening. Good evening.
Thank you very much for joining us. Ambassador, I would like to start with you this evening, please. I think a good starting point would be to assess as well as discuss the state and importance of SADC as a regional body.
Well, SADC was a product of specific historical circumstances. And before it was transformed into what is today Southern African Development Community, it was preceded by the Southern African Development Coordinating Conference, which was coordinating developmental activities with a view to strengthen the capacity of its member states to resist and reduce dependency on apartheid South Africa. Now, that was one dimension. At the same time also, there was the organization of frontline states, which was more a political arm, coordinating the political activities, military activities, and providing support to the liberation movements. Now, with the liberation of Southern Africa and the democratization of South Africa, then one can say the two elements of the predecessor, which was the coordinating of economic activities and political activities under frontline states, were merged into one through the SADC Treaty, which then aimed to maintain peace and security in the region, ensure political cooperation, and develop common value systems. I think the task was that what the region has gone through in terms of conflicts, that those not be repeated again, and mechanism to ensure that that doesn't happen has to be put in place. But there was also an understanding of the nexus between development and peace and security. And therefore, you cannot, sustainable peace and security require development. And therefore, there was a development agenda to make sure that, not only to make sure that we improve the welfare of the people of the region through program of cooperation and integration. And we can maybe, with time, get back to that, what it means in terms of what integration means.
Thank you very much for that overview, Ambassador. Just very briefly, reflecting on why and how it had come about as a regional body, how would you assess how we are faring?
I think we have made tremendous strides in the various areas. Now, let me say that, the unique feature of SADC is that a lot of regional organizations start off as an one-issue organization, either focusing on peace and security, an organization for peace and security cooperation, or organization for economic cooperation, focusing only maybe on market integration. And SADC adopted what is called Development Integration Agenda, which means that you combine both the functional cooperation, that is development of infrastructure and so forth, which will facilitate, of course, the movement of goods and services and so on. And then also in the area of trade and investment, as well as political cooperation. And because of that agenda, it is sometimes difficult to measure. You know, it's easy if you are focusing on one area. It's easy to measure and you can see what has been achieved. But on the whole, I think the region has progressed fairly well in terms of integration. There are still a lot of work to be done. But politically, I think there is excellent political cooperation, not only in terms of what is happening at the level of SADC, but also in multilateral organization. At the, you see a SADC group, at the African Union, you see a SADC group, at the UN, and so forth. So, and this is enhancing our bargaining position vis-a-vis other players globally.
Thank you very much, Ambassador. Dr. Nyambe, from your perspective, to what extent, if any, has the existence, the presence of SADC shaped its member states, the region, and perhaps the continent of Africa as a whole?
Well, thank you for the question. I think SADC has nurtured, if I'll put it like that, from an agreement perspective, the common direction that member states have taken, given the dictates of the agreement itself. Yes, there may be challenges, but I think staying together has helped member states to shape their policies, to ensure that the goals of SADC and the objectives are realized. That comes from a perspective of harmony at the political level, the understanding of the one directional pulling in terms of economic fundamentals, even though, yes, there are challenges that have come in, especially what happened in 2008, 2009, the global and financial crisis, as well as what is now this COVID pandemic. So such outbreaks or such kind of drawbacks always affects what was there before, and then tends to undermine sometimes the way the SADC perspective is envisaged in terms of future perspectives.
According to you, one way through which this body has shaped its member states is the way in which they draw in the same direction as far as economic fundamentals are concerned. Help us understand what that means in practice.
For example, there is what used to be called macroeconomic convergence targets. Those macroeconomic convergence targets were indicators that were set in place to ensure that some aspects of managing economies, such as public debt, issues to do with economic growth, inflation, were set to certain levels so that they don't spiral beyond such. So that helped a lot in terms of pulling the region in the same direction. But of course, like I said, there are many issues that again are common to the region. Some are plans that should be implemented, but some are issues that are common to undermining the very same goals that the region wants to realize. So if we speak about, again, the very same one direction pulling in terms of economic gains, that also relates to issues of ensuring that infrastructure development takes place in the region, which has a bearing on economic growth and economic development. What we see now, the Kazungula Bridge, for example, between Botswana and Zambia, that is an element born out of the very same SADC fundamentals to facilitate trade, to ensure that countries are connected in terms of the transportation systems, as well as ensuring that the way in terms of currencies, considering that currencies should be also managed to prevent them from turning out to be volatile for the benefits of economies. So in other words, there's always a clear understanding that everything that is managed in the region should help the citizens of the region to benefit economically. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Doctor. Madam, to what extent, if any, has the existence, the presence of this regional body helped shape member states, helped shape the region, and perhaps even contributed to shaping the African continent?
I think SADC as a body has on figures and on paper, helped shaped how best we developed and growed, specifically with small countries such as ourselves, Namibia and Malawi, with a small economy, very little and limited economic muscle. We are not highly industrialized to be able to compete, yet we're able to get the goods and services that we need from all the other bodies. However, it has also created a dependency for us, because we have remained the smallest sibling in terms of being able to compete in terms of trade and services. And we are now, and COVID has shown that to us. Our over-dependency, for example, on South Africa is part of what the SADC agreement has created. When you don't put your domestic matters into place to be able to ensure that you're growing together with the region. So yes, it has developed the sub-region of Southern Africa. It has grown it. It has allowed for us to have almost a similar shared experience in terms of trade and services. But yes, there has been some challenges in terms of infrastructure. We have benefited in terms of access to service and costs and all other agreements that come with it, including SACU, being able to maintain our economy. So yes, it has grown our region, and in so speaking, we can able to contribute as a body then to the whole of the continent.
How is our purported over-reliance on neighboring South Africa the result of the existence and the presence of SADC as a regional body?
SADC as a regional body opens up our border in terms of trade. Yes, we can have a few policies in place that allows us to say, for now, we are cutting on this and that, but it's temporary. We cannot close the Namibia-South African trade. And that has meant that the Namibian industry is heavily relying on South Africa. Equally so, it means that we are competing directly with South Africa. So the competitiveness for a small industry that wants to grow, for example, agriculture, they are trying by all means to try and see how best can they compete with the much bigger and industrialized and a big infrastructure, money in terms of the agricultural landscape that they have set up in South Africa to the one in Namibia. And you can consistently see the competitive nature of our products on the shelves and also across. How many South African products are selling here, as well as in Zambia, as in Malawi, as opposed to the same product we are producing. We can even use the sugar, as opposed to the same sugar product that we're producing in Namibia. So in terms of them being bigger, they're able to use economies of scale to have a cheaper product than what we can when we are selling outside. So that in itself tells you the story of how it has created that small barrier, but it can still be overcome.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Just
But
very
may I come?
briefly,
Yes.
Ambassador.
Yes, I think one shouldn't just look at trade in terms of our relations with South Africa, but we should look also at the global trade liberalization, because not only South African products are in our market, there are Chinese products, there are products from all over the world. And therefore, you know, now if we can't compete with our neighbor, how are we going to compete with the rest of the world?
A concern, if I understood it correctly,
No,
Ambassador, was
I'm
not the competition,
Yes.
was the over-reliance. That's what she flagged.
Yes. You know, for me, I think what regional integration offers, it's actually you are testing yourself against somebody who's better than you.
Yes.
And that prepares you for global competitiveness. But if you can't compete against your next door neighbor, how are you going to compete with the most industrialized? Because South Africa admittedly is better than us in some ways, but is not the most developed of all the countries in the world. And with the globalization and trade liberalization, every product finds its way here. In fact, some of the products we are importing from South Africa are not even South African. South Africa would import them from the EU, repackage them, and export them to us. This happens all the time. So I don't think that, in fact, if anything, regional integration should be able to enhance your competitiveness, because you are not creating. We have seen in the era of import substitution, where you are creating products that are actually sometimes substandards, they are not tested, and you rely on the domestic market.
Ambassador,
but that time is over.
Thank you very much for that interjection. Mr. Madakufamba?
Yes, hello?
Yes, you can hear us, sir. Sir,
Yes,
can you...
I can hear you loud and clear.
Very well, there's an echo, unfortunately. Now, the Southern African Research and Documentation Center is a regional knowledge resource center that aims to improve effectiveness of important developmental processes in the Southern African region, now collecting, producing, and disseminating very important information, as well as enabling the capacity to generate and use knowledge. How far would you say has SADC progressed as a region in terms of regional integration against this backdrop of your center?
Yes, thank you very much. Unfortunately, I have not been able to follow the discussion that you have been having with the other panelists, so forgive me if I plow over the same ground.
No problem.
Yes, so as you rightly said, we are a regional knowledge resource center that does research that contributes to development policy in Southern Africa. And we do so through our specialized institutes that focus on issues related to economic integration, democracy and governance, water and climate, gender and development, and of course the work that we are doing on documenting the history of Southern Africa. And we have been cooperating with the SADC through the SADC Secretariat for quite some time now, through a long-standing memorandum of understanding. And to come to your question about how far SADC has progressed with regional integration, I think it's fair to say that SADC has really come a long way since that day when the Southern African Development Coordination Conference was established on the 1st of April 1980, when the 9 heads of state and government converged in Lusaka in Zambia, where they signed the Memorandum of Understanding that we have come to know as the Lusaka Declaration. There's a lot that has been achieved. SADC, the SADC, when it was formed then, it was formed under conditions of conflict. It was formed under conditions of apartheid destabilization, as you would know, during the apartheid regime in South Africa. And of course, with the changing political and economic landscape in Southern Africa, so has the focus of regional integration in SADC has also evolved. Of course, with the political independence having been achieved, of course, with the independence of Namibia in 1990. And of course, multiracial democracy in South Africa in 1994. There has been a sense of unit, relative peace, and better environment for development in Southern Africa. Mm. And of course, I must allude to the historic summit that was held there in the capital of Windhoek, which culminated in the Windhoek Declaration, which sought to deepen regional integration across various sectors that SADC is now focusing on. There's really looking back, a lot that has been achieved in trying to bring together the countries of the region. We started with 9 countries, now 16 member states. That is by itself is a testament to the good work and relevance of regional integration that is driven through the Southern African Development Community.
So I'm happy you're touching on the Windhoek Declaration. What role does the media continue to play as far as this integration agenda is concerned?
Well, actually, one of the issues that keeps coming out of research that is being done on SADC is the fact that SADC is not known well enough to beyond the government officials who deal with SADC issues on a regular basis. So in the majority of cases, the SADC citizens who in fact are the primary beneficiaries of regional integration are broadly unaware of the opportunities for socio-economic improvement and poverty eradication that can be obtained through the regional integration. So this brings into prominence the role that the media can play to educate and inform the citizens so that they can be critical thinkers in participating in the process of regional integration in Southern Africa. So the media plays a very, very important role, and SADC, we always, one of our mandates is to train journalists, to capacitate them to report better and report more on SADC.
Thank you very much, sir. Ambassador, in pursuit of regional integration, which are the key obstacles hampering that pursuit?
Oh dear. Now, in pursuit of regional integration, first of all, I think we have addressed the issue of peace and security. Obviously, from time to time, you have a situation like either in the DRC or Angola, and now in Mozambique. But I think the obstacle to regional integration, depending on how you define it, from a trade integration point of view, is first of all that our economies are more externally oriented. We are exporting raw material to the industrialized country and import finished goods. And that means that the trade among our countries then remain low. And we trade more with the rest of the world than among ourselves. I think that is there is a structural issue there. Of course, the other issue is also the issue of infrastructure, which a lot of progress has been made, but still there. And then the common values, the issue of free movement of persons is still a challenge. But I think a lot has been achieved. There is a greater freedom of movement. And I think, as Dr. Nyambe will testify, that we have greater exchanges of students and academic staff and so forth. So there is a lot of that has been, but there are fundamental issues. And one of them, of course, is because regional integration, and we say our agenda is development integration. And it's a question of if you are not producing enough, let's say, finished goods, then you will be dependent on the export of raw material. And therefore, the capacity to produce, and of course, is linked to the issue of industrialization. I think that is the greatest challenge, is that the industrial capacity of our region is lagging behind. Only South Africa has greater capacity, and to a certain extent Mauritius. Zimbabwe was doing well, and then there were some challenges because of the politics of the time and several issues. And Zimbabwe is not, maybe it's coming back now, it's not the industrial power or the center that it was. But the issue of industrialization is the greatest challenge facing the region.
How does one overcome that challenge?
Well, I think how do you overcome the issue of industrialization? First of all, it's we have, it's a question of capacity. We always talk about supply side constraints, because the developed country, for example, have provided market access to our regions and our individual countries through various agreements. Now, our capacity to produce and export our products to those markets is limited. And that is, first of all, it's a question of technology, it's a question of capital. And I think those are some of the issues we have to address, the question of technology and capital.
Thank you very much, Ambassador. Dr. Nyambe, from your perspective, which are the main potential obstacles in our pursuit of regional integration?
Okay, let me just start first of all by saying that, yes, I concur with the Ambassador. I think some of the obstacles that I'll just pick on what he didn't touch on, because what he said are really major issues of peace and security and so forth. But the issue of poverty is highly emphasized in the SADC agreements, because that goes into different protocols as well, but is one of the fundamental objectives. Poverty is still a big problem in the entire SADC. It's not only the smaller countries, economical, that are suffering from the high levels of poverty. So it's a stubborn social ill that needs to be dented by means of the very same existing domestic policies and those at the SADC level in terms of protocols.
Just one moment,
Yes.
Doctor. Why are you of the view that those very existing policies would be effective when thus far they have not been effective in addressing poverty?
That is, in other words, domestic policies at country levels, not at the SADC level.
Yes, but why have those not been successful?
They are effective on paper. In some cases, they're effective practically, but they tend to be undermined by a number of things. How do you address poverty? There should be some very reasonable income levels that society should command. And there should be enough revenues that come to the state in order for government to be able to distribute that to address certain services and to assist with addressing some services that the poor requires. One of the issues that are also critical is coming up with, if, as you put it, some of the policies may not be very effective, but we need to look into redistributive policies that can assist with channeling the resources that the country generates to ensure that everyone is carried on board. I think if that can be spread to the entire SADC in terms of revising existing policies, that will help. But the other issue is, of course, I think our sister here touched on the issue of South Africa. But I think there is an element of agglomeration. South Africa attracts industries and investors compared to all other countries. Why? Because of infrastructure advantage. It's also a big market in terms of the population. The income levels are also much better. When you go to other sectors such as agriculture, they have better farming techniques that they use, including the natural environment. So to compete with them, we also need to up the game in terms of ensuring that we become countries that use high tech.
Dr. Nyambe, just very briefly, what are these redistribution policies that you're talking about?
Okay, redistributive policies are policies that could be considered, for example, say, I can give you an example. If a country is doing very well resource-wise, you may have minerals, like what Namibia now wants to do with the sovereign wealth arrangement. It happens that such were not in place, so you could simply accumulate resources and appear to be a country that registers high performance in terms of growth, but people on the ground sometimes can be left out. So you need to ensure that you have policies that can channel the resources, either through job creation or sometimes through assisting with the services that are needed, improving on infrastructure. By so doing, you are redistributing, including the social support systems.
Thank you.
That should be in place. Thank you
very much. Should you want to participate in tonight's very important conversation, if you have a question for one of the panelists, the number to dial is 061 291 3339. 061 291 339. Please remember to switch off your television set to avoid any confusion. Madam, amongst others, Ambassador Mwende flagged our challenges relating to industrialization as one of the main impediments to regional integration. Dr. Nyambe spoke about poverty eradication and also put redistribution policies on the table. What is your take on which the key impediments are to regional integration?
Not to take away from what Ambassador has said or what the Dean has said, one would want to say that domestic affairs of the different countries in terms of being able to implement policy. We have seen over the period of years that as countries, as Africa, as a continent, as a region, we have very well-researched policy documents that articulate the reality on the ground, meaning that they speak to matters of unemployment, high unemployment, measures of lack of industrialization. They speak to issues of inequality and poverty. They speak to lack of social support and social welfare. So what then tells you is that if these policies are in place, the challenge then should be governance, implementation. So, and on that note, one then comes to say that congratulations to the people of Zambia. They've just had an election. And the people have voted to say that we wanted somebody else to speak on our behalf, different governance structures, a different way of thinking. Really, if we have to be at the heart of the matter of the African challenge, and is that policy is not implemented. It is not made a reality.
Can you just pause that thought for a brief
to
moment,
our
please?
issues.
We have Joel all the way from Soccermund on the line. Good evening.
Oh, good evening, Denver.
Yes.
How are you?
I'm doing well, thank you. How are you, Joel?
Great. Yes, I just got a contribution.
Please
now,
go ahead.
What I would like to say is that for regional integration to be an effective component in future, I think that we have to revisit the business perspective as well as the business perspective, the economic perspective, and then the political perspective as a way of actually creating, lastly, an enabling environment for us in order to prosper with regards to regional integration. But if we look at things from a textbook perspective, I think we're just going to dwell around.
Thank you.
Looking at the practical perspective, at the end of the day, it will weigh less. So at the end of the day, the people on the ground will ask themselves, what's the use of regional integration at the end of the day?
Thank you very much for your contribution, Joel.
Oh, it's a pleasure.
Does it tie in with what you were sharing with us, that we have these beautiful policies in place, but our challenge lies with implementation?
If I'm understanding Joe, without necessarily creating a dialogue, I'm understanding him to say that the reality is the textbook perspective is not being put into practice. So what is on paper is not being made a reality. And the other aspect that we need to look into is education. Is our education a sector producing for us the minds that will be able to take us into the global integrated world? Because like Ambassador has mentioned, we cannot run away from integration. And now it is here. The Africa Intercontinental Trade Agreement is in place. So we have a borderless, from a trade perspective, we have a borderless a continent.
I'm happy you're raising that. Are you of the view that it would help address the issue that Ambassador also raised earlier relating to our challenges with trade amongst each other?
It will definitely do that. Regional integration is key to all the challenges that we are facing. However, putting our domestic policies into place, putting our house in order, there is a very well-drafted document researched by the Bank of Namibia, our Reserve Bank. And they have put in place a very, very good research document that highlights exactly the challenges that we are facing. One of them is that we have a high wage bill. And that's why investors...
Just park that thought for a moment, please. We have Natangwe all the way from Oshakati on the line. Good evening.
Yes, good evening, sir.
Yes, Natangwe, we're listening to you.
Yes, I want just to share my contribution as well.
Please go ahead and do so briefly.
Okay, you are talking about integration in SADC region, right?
Yes, sir.
My contribution here is that when it's coming to political sectors within the SADC region, why can't all the governments for those members, for the countries of members in the SADC region, came together and say, no, let us try to train our own people here in SADC so that we can able to have those people to explore mineral resources in Africa instead of getting those ones that are from overseas countries like Chinese, American, and so on. Because if you want to develop the industrialization of SADC, that is the first thing that we need to do, so that we can able to have our own the engineers in SADC for just those who are going to explore within the SADC region.
Thank you very much, Ntangwe. Ambassador, would you like to respond to the issue relating to skills transfer within the region and how that ties in with what she had said also in terms of the emphasis on education?
Yes. Well, I think that is critical because it's one of the constraints, of course, that I didn't mention to not only regional integration but also development, because the human factor is the most important factor of development. It is people who make things happen. In fact, the countries that are more advanced today, they are not advanced because they have more natural resources. Countries with less natural resources but with more advanced human resources are doing better than the ones that are endowed with the natural resources. Therefore, and Namibia, of course, lag behind in terms of human index. Our human resources in the region, actually, we are among those that are lagging behind. Partially, we can talk about the history, but also the challenges within our educational system. So there is a lot to be done. We have to produce the kind of skills or cadres that are able to operate a modern economic system. And I think President Nyoma used to emphasize the importance of science and technology and mathematics. We are lagging behind in some of those areas. And as long as we don't have those skills, I think we will continue to struggle.
Very well. Ambassador, yes, an issue that you touched on earlier as well relates to peace and security. What do you make of the involvement of member states in sovereign countries when there is unrest? Case in point being what's happening in Mozambique at the moment. What's your take?
Well, the SADC protocol, and there is a protocol on peace and security, make provision for mutual assistance, not only SADC but also the African Union. Because we have moved away from the tradition of non-interference in domestic affairs that allowed countries to actually kill their own people, and everybody was standing by and watching in the name of internal affairs, non-interference in internal affairs. Now, if there is a threat to state security, it is legitimate for the region through its mechanism to intervene.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Ambassador. Dr. Nyamba, we're unfortunately starting to run out of time this evening. As far as this year's summit's theme is concerned, namely bolstering productive capacities in the face of COVID-19 pandemic for inclusive, sustainable economic and industrial transformation, how does it speak to present-day, current SADC challenges? Briefly.
Okay, I think that is more into reigniting economies. Because I think the wisdom behind that seeks to understand that economies are at their lowest levels, or they have been hammered by the pandemic. In order to think ahead post-COVID, there is need to understand that productive capacities should be stimulated, as they will assist with job creation, growing economies, infrastructure development, as well as creating the environment in which humans can thrive properly.
Sorry,
by
Doctor, just
creating
one moment.
businesses. Yes.
Just one moment, please. We've unfortunately lost Nelongo from Oshakati. Our apologies to you. Yes, Doc?
Yes, so that the environment in which human beings exist can also be favorable to business establishments. So I think that is the whole issue about the issue of the productive capacity of African economies. Leaving it without such would simply mean that there's some kind of comfort with what is happening around. But anyone should think beyond the current state to ensure that at least the continent goes back into the manner in which at least humans will benefit, businesses will thrive, the environment will also be in good shape, there's peace and all such kind of things, because poverty and lack of economic growth is a threat to any form of stability.
Thank you very much. Madam, help us take stock very briefly of the lessons that COVID-19 taught the region that we can use for the future of regional integration within SADC.
I think one of the greatest lessons that the region has to really learn is that we cannot run away from technology. I don't know where we are in terms of the industrial revolutions, but right now the world is speaking of the 5th industrial revolution. As a continent, we still have those that do not have access to basic water, basic electricity, and I'm calling it basic, meaning that somebody must be able to take a device and go charge it, network, and all these aspects. And that is why it's critical that any policy and any integration, whether domestic, regionally, or internationally and globally, must always translate itself to the men on the street. We must be able to say that the last person on the value chain becomes better off because we are now integrated, because we've created more industrial opportunity, we've created infrastructural development, we've been able to create more jobs. It is unfortunate that unemployment within the SADC sectors continues to increase in South Africa, in Namibia, in Zambia, in Malawi, in Mozambique. And worrisome still is peace and security. We do not have a SADC military that can immediately respond, that has the funds to any insecurity that may come within SADC or Africa.
How do you envision a SADC military to exist and operate?
Now, Denver, you're asking me to become very technical. But what I'm envisioning, or basically to say, is that we have a military that is funded and has access to resources to be able to immediately respond to any loss of life or instability within any country within SADC or Africa. Because there are still several areas and regions that are struggling. And we have it specifically in the DRC. Access to all of the resources and the capacity, specifically just of that one country, is limited to the fact that not all areas are as democratic, are as accessible as we would have wanted them to be, due to peace and security.
The way the bloc operates at the moment, and Ambassador also spoke about that, is that should there be a challenge in a member state for individual countries to mobilize troops to be sent to that country, what do you make of that intervention as it stands at the moment?
I'm hearing you, and I'm hearing for an individual country to mobilize.
So for member states to mobilize troops when there is a challenge in a member state.
To the capacity that you can. The defense budget across the world continues to decrease in one way or the other. Yet the cost of defense is high. And we call it defense, and that's not exactly the best word.
Thank you.
The cost of peace.
Thank you very much.
Yes.
Mr. Madakufamba, are you back?
Yes, I'm back.
In conclusion, what would you say not only are the key milestones that you've published in a recent article, but which are the key challenges for the region as we wrap up this evening?
Thank you. Yes, and just to indicate that there is a recent book that report that we produced to that looks at the 40 years that the SADC has been in existence, and it does the publication does capture some of the major milestones and achievements, and of course also the challenges that have been encountered over the 4 decades of SADC's existence. So in terms of major challenges, I think there's no doubt that a lot has been done to put policies, regional policies in place, for example, through the many protocols that have been signed by SADC member states. But the challenge remains on implementation those regional decisions and agreements. For these regional commitments to have an impact on the citizens, they have got to be aligned, harmonized and aligned with national laws. And this is where SADC as a region, the member states that make up SADC, are, in my opinion, are really lacking.
Thank you very much,
there's
sir.
still a great deal of work that needs to be done in that area. And I just wanted to add, Denver, that this is where some of the institutions that have been formed at a regional level and institutions that still need to be formed become very important. And in this regard, I want to highlight the SADC regional parliament that is still under discussion. I think this is a very important regional institution if regional integration is to be actualized at the national level.
Thank you very much,
for the benefit
sir.
of the citizen.
Thank you very much, sir. Madam, just very briefly in conclusion, what are your expectations from the Malawi Summit this week?
Our expectations from the Malawi Summit is to see that heads of state recommit themselves to re-engineer and fast-track processes as they were brought back by COVID. We would like to see the heads of state commit themselves to decreasing unemployment. Would like to see them accelerating information communication technology and access to it and the growth of it in terms of in the region. We'd also want to see that, because it's a policy-making platform as well, would like them to see making very clear policies in terms of peace and security within the SADC region. How best do we ensure that we continue to grow in those areas? Because it's a bit worrisome at our response rate and how fast we come on board to be able to assist a country that needs assistance.
Thank you very much, ma'am. Dr. Nyambe, what do you want to see happen this week going forward?
My expectation is the pronunciation on how to retool the very same productive capacity of economies, as well as to think about the aspects of peace as it affects Mozambique currently. The issue of what will happen to address the issue of COVID, despite that we are in the middle of COVID now, but to ensure that economies can look beyond and recover again post the pandemic, and how to think about ways to manufacture or produce local remedies that can assist with COVID and related complications. Yeah, I think that is one of the issues that I would think should be looked into.
Thank you very much, Doc.
Yes.
Ambassador, you have the final word this evening. Take it away.
Yes. I think for me, everybody was talking about implementation and lack of implementation. And the management of the regional integration process, to me, is critical. The role of the intergovernmental processes vis-a-vis the Secretariat, I think it's important. Because if you look at most multilateral organizations, there is continuous engagement of member states in the regional agenda. We go to a summit, we take decisions, we come back, we deal with national issues until the next meeting of SADC. And therefore, that continuous engagement by member states in the process, in pushing forward the agenda of integration, is lacking. Our institutional structure as such that it doesn't provide framework for member states to continue. I was serving at the UN, and the General Assembly was in session. We were meeting continuously, various committee meeting on a continuous basis. But you can't, hopefully, you look at the EU, ministers are meeting every second week or every month and so forth. So you can't really have a serious regional agenda that ministers meet once or twice a year, and you know what happened in between. So the mechanism must be strengthened so that, especially the intergovernmental mechanism, because the agenda must be driven by member states. And as it is now, it is driven by a Secretariat without sufficient authority to speak on behalf of member states. And that really is one of the fundamental weaknesses of the organization that needs to be addressed.
Very briefly, how can one deal with that lack of authority on the part of the Secretariat?
I think first of all, you know, member states are very jealous of their sovereignty, and therefore they
Rightly so, perhaps.
Yes, rightly so, and I think that's number one. And so, for you to be able to support the Secretariat, you have to have a committee of ambassadors based in Gaborone, representing the member states, interacting on a continuous basis with the Secretariat to make sure that the agenda and the decisions of Council and Summit are implemented, at least at the level of the Secretariat. Because when you come to projects, the implementation is at the level of member states. But when you come to policy, you know, there is an intergovernmental process. And I think one of the fundamental weaknesses is that the intergovernmental process is very weak.
Thank you very much for your time. Thank you for sharing your expertise. And let's continue the constructive conversation.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And that concludes this week's edition of Talk of the Nation. We'll be back next week, same time, same place. Have a safe week.
Thank you.